Update: my wife appeared at my door after years of my disappearance from her life, after that night when she ignored my warnings and went to the party with another man. She knew I wouldn't tolerate her betrayal, but she left anyway. And now, after all this time, here she is standing before me, crying, trying to convince me that she was drugged that night. And while my new love calls me for dinner from behind the door, I couldn't help but wonder, what did she expect me to say? Part 3, Beverly smiled and nodded before heading back into the living room. I watched her walk away, my mind still reeling from Alice's visit. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. Not for what Alice and I had been, but for what we could have been. I had loved her once, deeply. But that love had withered away the moment she walked out on me, and there was no bringing it back. I shook my head, determined to push those thoughts aside. I finished getting dressed and found Beverly sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Ready?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's go." As we walked to the door, I couldn't help but glance around the apartment. This place had been my refuge after Alice. It had been the place where I had started over, built a new life. I was happy now, happier than I had been in years. Alice's return had stirred up old memories, but they were just that, memories. We headed out to Angelo's, the local Italian place we loved. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, the smell of fresh garlic bread and herbs filling the air as we entered. Beverly reached for my hand, and I squeezed it gently, glad to be with someone who brought peace into my life rather than chaos. Dinner went smoothly, filled with light conversation about work, plans for the weekend, and a few inside jokes that only Beverly and I shared. I could see how much she enjoyed these simple moments. We finished our meal and decided to take a walk around town before heading back. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of pine and the distant hum of cars. It was a perfect night, and for the first time since Alice's visit, I felt at ease again. When we got back to the apartment, Beverly slipped out of her heels and stretched. "I'm exhausted," she said, plopping down on the couch. "Mind if we watch a movie?" "Sure," I said, settling in beside her. I picked out an old classic, something lighthearted and easy to watch. As the movie played, Beverly snuggled closer to me, her warmth a comfort against the lingering chill of the night. But my mind wandered again, drifting back to Alice. I didn't want to think about her anymore, but there was one question that gnawed at me: could I have prevented all of this? Was there something I could have done differently, something that would have kept our marriage intact? I shook my head. No. I had given Alice plenty of chances, and she had made her choice. There was no sense in dwelling on the past. Beverly must have noticed my distraction because she nudged me gently. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling down at her. "Just thinking." "About her?" Beverly asked softly. "Yeah," I admitted. "But it doesn't matter. She's not part of my life anymore." "You are." Beverly smiled, satisfied with my answer, and snuggled even closer. We finished the movie in silence, and by the time the credits rolled, I had let go of the lingering thoughts about Alice. She had come back, but I wasn't going to let her disrupt the life I had built. Beverly was my future now, and I was determined to keep it that way. As the night wore on, I realized that no matter how much Alice might try to fight for me, it was already too late. I had moved on, and there was no going back. The door to my past had been closed, and I intended to keep it that way. When Beverly finally drifted off to sleep, I lay there quietly, staring at the ceiling. I had no idea what Alice was planning or how long she intended to stick around, but I knew one thing for sure: my life belonged to me now, and no one was going to take that away from me, not even Alice. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but for tonight, I was at peace. And that, I realized, was all I had ever really wanted. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain gently tapping against the window. Beverly was still asleep beside me, her breath soft and steady. For a moment, I just watched her, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm. After everything that had happened, it was nice to wake up to peace instead of the chaos that had consumed my life back then. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and made my way to the kitchen. I brewed a pot of coffee and stared out the window, watching the rain fall in steady streams. My mind drifted back to Alice. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done yet. She had said she was moving here to fight for me, and knowing Alice, she wasn't going to let this go easily. I took a deep breath. It didn't matter. I had made my decision, and no matter what Alice did, I wasn't going back. I had started over, built something new with Beverly, and I wasn't going to let Alice tear that apart. Not now. Not ever. Just as I was pouring a cup of coffee, I heard a knock at the door. I felt my heart skip a beat. It was early, too early for anyone to be dropping by unannounced. I quickly set the coffee pot down and walked over to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked through the peephole and my stomach tightened. It was Alice. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to open the door or just ignore it. But knowing Alice, if I didn't answer, she'd only become more determined. With a heavy sigh, I unhooked the chain and opened the door slightly, enough to see her face. She looked different. There was something in her eyes, determination, maybe, but also desperation. She had always been stubborn, but this was something else entirely. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I crossed my arms over my chest, blocking the doorway. "There's nothing to talk about, Alice." "Please," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Just hear me out." Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider and stepped aside, allowing her to come in. She walked past me, her eyes quickly scanning the apartment before she settled into one of the chairs at the small dining table. I stayed standing, not wanting to make this more comfortable than it needed to be. "Say what you need to say, Alice," I said flatly. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and something that almost looked like fear. "I know I messed up," she began, her voice soft. I know I hurt you, and I know I can't undo what happened. But Sam, I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this. I didn't go to that party thinking I'd ruin everything. I was stupid, naive, maybe, but I never wanted to lose you. I said nothing, just watching her as she struggled to find the right words. Part of me wanted to believe her, but the damage was already done. What she said now couldn't change what had happened. I've thought about it every day since, she continued, her voice shaking. Every day, I've regretted walking out that door. I've regretted not listening to you, not valuing what we had. But you have to believe me, I never wanted any of this. I didn't want to betray you. I didn't mean for any of it to happen, I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Alice, you made your choice. You walked out. And I warned you what would happen if you did. I know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. But it's not too late. We can still fix this. We can. No, Alice, I interrupted, shaking my head. We can't. You can't just erase everything that's happened. You walked out on our marriage. You made that choice. And I moved on. I've started over. You need to let this go. She looked down at her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I love you, Sam, she said after a long pause. I always have. And I'll always regret what I did. I loved you too, I said, my voice softening just a bit. But love isn't enough sometimes. Trust is gone. Respect is gone. And without those things, there's no foundation left. I've found peace in my life now, Alice. I've moved on. You need to do the same. She wiped at her eyes, trying to hold herself together. I don't know how to. Start by letting go of what we had, I said gently. It's in the past. You need to focus on the future now. Alice nodded slowly, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She stood up, her movement slow and deliberate, like she was trying to drag out the moment. She paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. Goodbye, Sam, she whispered. Goodbye, Alice, I replied, my voice steady. She stepped out into the rain, and I watched as she disappeared down the hallway. A strange sense of relief washed over me as the door clicked shut. I had finally closed that chapter of my life. Beverly appeared in the doorway to the bedroom, her eyes sleepy but concerned. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, I said with a nod. It's over. She walked over to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. You sure? I looked down at her and smiled. I'm sure. We stood there in silence for a moment, just holding each other, listening to the rain outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Alice was gone, and I was free to move forward, truly move forward, without the weight of the past dragging me down. And with Beverly by my side, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready.